All right, welcome to the Mary Heineken Dumont University. We're experiencing today the political science department with Justin Finkelstein from the Anti-Defamation League. We're very privileged to have him with us here, not only because he's my nephew, my first nephew, but also because he's an analyst at the Center of Extremism on extremism at the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. His research focuses on trends and development within the U.S. and anti-Israel movement. He previously worked at the American Friends of the Hebrew University. He was an associate scholar at the Philadelphia-based Foreign Policy Research Institute, where his research focused on Arab-Israeli conflict. Justin has also a program associate for the study of the U.S. Institute on Religious Pluralism and Democracy, a State Department-funded program brings undergraduate students from the Middle East to the U.S. for education about religious diversity, democracy, and dialogue. Justin received a master's degree from the Near Eastern Studies program at New York University, prestigious New York University, in 2012, and has traveled and studied in Israel and in Morocco as well. It's our pleasure to have Justin with us today to share with us some thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I am indeed the first nephew, the oldest nephew of my Uncle Joel, or as you know him, Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. Very nice introduction. I will take it. I just want to thank, of course, my uncle for having me, and I want to thank all of you, the Anshei community, and everyone else that's logged on for this call. Unfortunately, we are here under these circumstances during a pandemic, and we're here to talk about anti-Semitism that's appeared specifically in relation to the pandemic. By way of introduction, like my uncle said, I'm an analyst at the Center on Extremism at the Anti-Defamation League. And to start, I wanted to just do a quick rundown over answering the question, what is the Center on Extremism at the Anti-Defamation League? In a nutshell, the Center on Extremism consists of a team of approximately a dozen experts and analysts who are constantly monitoring bigoted individuals and groups and working to disrupt and expose them. We are all in the spaces where hatred is active, so our knowledge is really firsthand. Whenever there's any physical violent threats against any community, we immediately report to law enforcement, and the Center on Extremism has been responsible for disrupting numerous domestic terror attacks. On a more personal note, one of the things I love about working at the Center on Extremism is, and at ADL, of course, is because of its dual mission of fighting both anti-Semitism and bigotry against everyone. In 1913, when the leaders of ADL, the founders of ADL, created the organization, they understood that in order to fight anti-Semitism, you need to, in the words of ADL's charter, secure justice and fair treatment to all. And this is reflected in the Center on Extremism's work, where we cover hatred directed at all communities. I want to preface also by just commenting that we are living in particularly unpredictable times. And this has played a role in bringing out both the best and the worst in people. I've seen a lot of great things from some of the people, from basically everyone in my circle, the people that I love, reaching out, gestures that show compassion, people expressing care for one another during the pandemic. On the other hand, scary and unpredictable times also bring out, like I said, the worst in people. And the Center on Extremism has documented an outpouring of hate and sometimes real-world actions in connection with the pandemic. As we'll see, sometimes this hatred is expressed knowingly by true believers who are ideologically committed to hatred and bigotry. And sometimes this sort of rhetoric is expressed by people who are simply ignorant or scared. And unfortunately today, we also have to deal with the politicization of the coronavirus and people who think that it's humorous to spread anti-Semitic and hateful memes, which can really influence people to become more hateful towards Jews and other groups. The two most affected groups since the pandemic began have been, unsurprisingly, the Asian community, as I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, know, and the Jewish community. Today, we're talking about the Jewish community. And before I get into the examples, I want to acknowledge also that as terrible as these examples and images are, they pale in comparison to the actual physical suffering and the loss that's been endured by so many because of the virus itself. And I just want to warn you in advance that some of the images and messages you see could shock and disturb you. A lot of them come from the far corners of the internet, like Gab and 4chan, though some do also come from mainstream social media like Twitter and Facebook. In order to draw out some common themes in the content we're going to see, I wanted to start with this image, which you've probably seen some version of since it's everywhere. Well, it's called the Happy Merchant. This particular image is used across the internet to express Jewish malevolence. It was created in the 1990s by an anti-Semitic artist to depict such negative anti-Semitic stereotypes about Jews. In this one image, we see physical repulsiveness, intimations of scheming, and greed.
This is this guy.
Some anti-Semites have equated Jews with the coronavirus itself.
He's talking about
this image
coronavirus and anti-Semitism.
Does so by showing anti-Semitic portrayals of Jews as the virus, who are gleefully marching across a ravaged landscape that's supposed to demonstrate the alleged destruction that Jewish people have imparted upon the world in pursuit of global domination during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of us will not be unfamiliar with the anti-Semitic trope of Jews spreading disease. This goes back to at least the 14th century or earlier, during the bubonic plague, when Jews were accused of poisoning the wells and spreading disease. In response, at that time, Jews were burnt at the stake, rounded up into synagogues in their homes, and those structures were burnt. In a way, this message actually conveys something worse because it equates, as I said, Jews with the virus itself, as opposed to just accusing Jews of purposefully spreading disease. During the pandemic, some anti-Semites have really honed in on the idea of Jews pulling the strings everywhere around the entire world with everything that's been going on related to the pandemic, all in pursuit of some sort of goals that would benefit themselves and at the expense of the rest of humanity. Here you have the Happy Merchant Jewish caricature inside the Trojan horse of the coronavirus, being led unwittingly into an ostensibly non-Jewish community. And it symbolizes some sort of global Jewish agenda, the Happy Merchant in the Trojan horse of the coronavirus. This really harkens back to the idea of a global Jewish cabal that exists to undermine nations, which was most prominently expressed in the protocols of the Elders of Zion in the early 20th century. Some anti-Semites claim, specifically hone in also in the idea that Jews created the virus. again invoking the well poisoning theory and positing that Jews are trying to get rich by selling a vaccine and are having already invented a vaccine before the coronavirus appeared and being behind the appearance of the coronavirus so that they could sell the vaccine and enrich themselves. On the left, you have the happy merchant in a hazmat suit with the caption stating that Jews started numerous diseases like SARS. And on the right, you have a theory that George Soros is behind this and that the locus of the attempt to disseminate the virus is in Israel, which was already working on a vaccine because, as we know, the scientific community was aware that some sort of coronavirus would be a threat to humans in the coming years. Note the use of the word also coincidences at the bottom of the right-hand image. This is something that hardcore anti-Semites use and have used way before the pandemic to denote when they think there's some sort of Jewish conspiracy that's afoot. A prevalent and classic anti-Semitic theme connects Jews to both greed and alleged dominance of the global financial system. And that's what we have here. And it's an equal opportunity offender with two racist images of an Asian person spreading the coronavirus, which of course is an anti-Asian trope that I'm sure we're all aware of. Following the racist images of the Asian person, we have the anti-Semitic theme with Uncle Sam handing a Jewish caricature that's very similar to the Happy Merchant. The check is made out to, quote, Jewish finance for $1.5 trillion. And as you might be aware also, when there's anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in the modern world, very frequently something about George Soros or the Rothschilds follow. On the left, you see a tweet from Sheriff David Clark that accuses George Soros of being somewhere behind the panic that was going on over when the coronavirus pandemic was starting. And on the right, you have a image of a member of the Rothschild family being weighed against ordinary people in the context of the coronavirus. And the Rothschild banker is larger and heavier, signifying his alleged power. And the smoke coming out of his cigars in the shape of euro signs and dollar signs, sending the message that he cares more about money than all of humanity, symbolized by all the people on the other side of the scale. And of course, these are anti-Semitic tropes. Now, anti-Semites have also incorporated unsurprisingly, their Holocaust denial into their rhetoric related to the coronavirus. So here you have a report that an Italian city was unable to cremate bodies quickly enough to be on pace with the death count. And anti-Semites here use this as proof that the Nazis couldn't have possibly cremated so many Jews during World War II. And on the bottom, they're propagating the message that Jewish historians were hiding this alleged knowledge from the rest of the world for all this time. Of course, we know that even a 21st century city's inability to cremate bodies fast enough doesn't compare to the massive infrastructure of the Nazi regime during World War II, during the Holocaust. But of course, this doesn't deter anti-Semites from making this specious claim. Others have used the coronavirus as an opportunity to promote anti-Israel rhetoric. A small but significant part of this has been anti-Semitic. On the left, you have an image of the coronavirus superimposed with the word Zionism, and underneath the word Zionism, if you can't see, it says the deadliest virus on earth. On the right, we have an example of an anti-Zionist leader of a group called Al-Auda, who is spreading the theory that Jews have manipulated the United States government for the benefit of Jews and Israelis. Some anti-Semites believe it was particularly Israeli Jews and Zionist Jews who have created and are spreading, allegedly, the coronavirus. So here you have the Made in Israel sign on top of on an image of a woman who's sick in the hospital, trying to spread the message that Israel and Jews are behind or want to sicken the entire world. On the right, you have infamous white supremacist, anti-Semite, former Ku Klux Klan leader, David Duke, who I'm sure you're familiar with, asking if President Trump has the coronavirus and intimating that if so, a, quote, global Zionist elite would be responsible. After the AIPAC conference this year in March, early March, when a small number of attendees tested positive for the coronavirus, a trope emerged that AIPAC conference goers were uniquely culpable for the spread of coronavirus around the United States. Here, a Twitter user makes this claim, as you can see, in addition to suggesting that God could be sending a sign that Zionism itself is a virus. It's also worth noting that equating Zionism with a virus is offensive to a great many Jews, and polls show that a majority of American Jews view Israel, a connection to Israel, to be a part of their religious, social, or cultural identities. And the hysteria of anti-Semitism can extend also to far-flung conspiracy theories that include somehow Zionism and Israel. This image, which is the header of an article in a publication that's loosely affiliated with the alt-right, suggests that the Jewish community and Israel are scheming under the pretext or the rubric of the coronavirus to relocate serial rapist Harvey Weinstein and others like him to Israel, where he and others would allegedly not have any consequences for their crimes. If you're unable to see, it's a little small on the lower right-hand corner in the red box. It says Jewish question, clearly intimating that Jews are somehow responsible for this alleged scheming. So this is a clear then anti-Semitic trope that's being propagated. And the theme that Israel is a haven for sexual predators is actually not something that is new. We've seen it before the pandemic in some extremist anti-Israel circles and among some anti-Semites. Many anti-Semites on 4chan and other sites like it, on the far-flung corners of the internet, are cheering the fact that some Jews have been infected by the coronavirus and are making threats to spread it to them. So here, as you can see, there's a meme that's sending a message to people that if they test positive for the coronavirus, to take your friends and go to the nearest synagogue, essentially weaponizing the virus. And these images basically call for the same thing. Spread the coronavirus if you have it or if you have symptoms. The image on the left actually calls for genocide against Jews, with the twist on the word Holocaust, with the word Holocaust on the bottom of the image on the left. And on the right, this image is not only anti-Semitic, but also Islamophobic, xenophobic, and also targets the media and vegans. It's worth noting that it takes aim at Jewish people twice in number 2, And then at the bottom on the right-hand image where it says, quote, if you have coronavirus symptoms, to, quote, visit Jerusalem and other Jew places. Another phenomenon has been explicitly anti-Orthodox and anti-Haredi anti-Semitic rhetoric. Shortly after the pandemic began, an anti-Semitic trope emerged that that Orthodox Jews and Haredi Jews in particular have a very high infection rate, and allegedly that they don't care about anyone else in the world being infected. So here we have online posts demonizing Haredi and Orthodox communities in New York and New Jersey as some sort of exceptionally harmful contagion to society. The image on the left calls for protective measures taken that have never been called for any other community in the US or anywhere. And on the right, we have other communities named aside from Muncie and New Square, and also it says that it would be justifiable for people to take up arms against the Orthodox and Haredi communities. Now, as a point of fact, it's worth noting that, of course, there's been some isolated, well-publicized, isolated incidents of small groups in the Orthodox and Haredi communities breaching coronavirus guidelines. But it's worth noting that this is not unique to Haredi and Orthodox communities. This has happened in every community. So nothing different. Here in the comments on the left, you have rabbis being equated, Orthodox and Haredi rabbis particularly being equated with Hitler, and the message that they allegedly have control over every individual in their communities, especially women and children, and that these communities are ignorant to the most basic coronavirus guidelines. And on the right, we have explicit calls for extermination, for genocide of these communities. It's worth noting that these sort of extreme comments for genocide are rare, and when they do appear, they're deleted usually by Facebook. They get reported also. And it might be noted that the comment on the left caused the comment on the right. The comment on the left could be, maybe, out of ignorance. It's, of course, extremely offensive. But it's worth noting that ignorance here caused really malicious, intentionally malicious messages to appear, which is a phenomenon that unfortunately is prevalent. Now, in some cases, COVID-19 related anti-Semitic sentiments expressed online, as the previous slide sort of intimated with the threats, have led to action in real life. In March, for example, as the headline on top shows, a small but significant segment of the George Washington University community that's in DC targeted for verbal harassment some Jews after it was reported that a small number tested positive after the APAC conference, like I said, in early March. People were understandably on high alert, but again, it was Jews who bore the brunt of this in a clear anti-Semitic incident. On the bottom, we have an incident being reported of a JetBlue flight attendant saying that, quote, dirty Jews are responsible for spreading the pandemic, saying this to a customer. Another way the coronavirus has brought anti-Semitism and offensive rhetoric into the real world was on display several months ago during the anti-quarantine protests, which you'll probably be familiar with. While these protests were predominantly attended by conservative activists and citizens expressing a range of concerns, unfortunately, these events also attracted anti-Semites and others who viewed these rallies as a platform to spread their beliefs, as you can see here. On the left, you have a man holding a blatantly anti-Semitic sign that has a drawing of a scheming rat meant to symbolize Jews, dehumanizing Jews, with the caption, "The Real Plague," again playing on the classic anti-Semitic trope of Jews spreading disease. The images in the middle and the right are qualitatively different, with them using offensively using Nazi imagery to send the message that Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who is Jewish, comparing him to Hitler and to the Nazi regime. And the sign in the middle, you're probably aware of you're probably familiar with it. It translates to "work sets you free," which is, of course, the message inscribed to this day on the gates of the Auschwitz death camp. You might be familiar also with the incident in March of a Haredi man in New York who was refused service at an auto shop with an employee telling him that they wouldn't serve him because he was spreading the virus. There was a video being taken. It was in this tweet here that seems to show clear anti-Semitic intent. But regardless of whether it was anti-Semitic intent or an extremely ignorant employee who thought who thought that Jews were spreading the coronavirus, the anti-Semitic impact of this is obvious and very clear, either way. Another example of a real-world impact was when white supremacist Timothy Wilson, who you see here, was stopped on the way to attacking a hospital several months ago. Fortunately, he was stopped before he could attack the hospital. He did not harm anyone. But there was a shootout, and he was killed during a shootout with the FBI. We know from law enforcement that he also considered targeting a shul. He also considered targeting a school with a large black student population, and he also considered targeting a mosque. And on the right is a message that he posted central to his belief system about the coronavirus, that Jews were behind the whole pandemic, created it, and are doing it for essentially global domination. And last, we have Zoom bombing. You can see here. First, what is Zoom bombing? It's a phenomenon that emerged when the pandemic began. And it's the practice of disrupting virtual meetings with graphic or threatening messages, which often include hate speech. Since, as we know, the coronavirus has forced most activities online, there's increasing reliance on Zoom and other streaming platforms, as we're all experiencing right now, being on Zoom. And unfortunately, both pranksters who just want to get a laugh, but also bigots, anti-Semites, racists, have infiltrated and engaged in Zoom bombing, as we see here, with someone who the Center on Extremism identified as Andrew Auenheimer, a known white supremacist, a known extremist, also known as Weave, when he disrupted two Jewish events that were happening in Massachusetts and California several months ago. In addition to what you see here, he shouted anti-Semitic messages and lifted up his shirt to show a swastika on his chest, a tattoo of a swastika on his chest. So we've seen all of these terrible anti-Semitic and hateful examples that have emerged during the pandemic. What can we do to fight back against this? I have 4 things listed here. 1, electronic security. It's important that whatever event you're having, that you take the appropriate steps to lock it down. ADL actually has a good best practices document that you can find on adl.org. Number 2, physical safety. We do want to stress that we have no evidence that any of the threats that I went over today are credible. But during this tumultuous time, you do, and it's incumbent upon all of us to take charge of our security and take any necessary steps. So, for example, if you're having minyanim in person, you might want to contact law enforcement to coordinate. And number 3, report. Of course, if there's an emergency, top priority, call 911, as always. Also, report to adl.org/report incident. You might ask, what does reporting to ADL do to fight against the tide of anti-Semitism? Well, we have relationships with social media companies in Silicon Valley where we're a trusted name, and we have the ability to convince many of them to take down the most vitriolic, anti-Semitic, and hateful posts. Simultaneously, it's important to report because, in a nutshell, data drives policy. The more data we have, the better we're able to advocate, expose, and counteract what we're seeing. So basically, there's a big difference between saying there's hateful things out there and actually having the hard statistics to prove it. Finally, call out bigotry whenever and wherever you see it. We all have a voice and the power to speak out. Right now, in particular, it's important to be active participants in the struggle for racial justice and in the fight against centuries of systemic racism in this country. ADL is committed to combating the bigotry, racism, and discrimination that targets all marginalized communities. Just as all people, not just Jewish people, should fight against anti-Semitism, so too should we fight against bigotry against all communities. This is a time when we need to care, yes, for ourselves, and also be good to each other, both within the Jewish community and outside of it. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Justin. It was really great to participate with you, not just in a family way, but also intellectually and see you professionally, and continue the great work you do there at ADL. We thank you for everything you do there and for joining us today and taking your time to do so. We appreciate it very much. You educate us, you edify us. It's good to be aware, and as you said, and we very much appreciate that. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And we do have our Chumash class on 11:30 on Mondays and Thursdays. You can join us this week as well. And we have our shofar at 7:45 in the morning. We have our Zoom mincha or in-person mincha this week. And please sign up. Please join us. And thanks so much once again for those who join us. A shout out to my brother Harris and his wife Jill, and also to brother-in-law Lenny, who's here with us. Also to my mom, who's with us as well, a.k.a. Audrey McFarlane. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.